why don't we talk about Jimi? Jimi Hendrix, what an incredible, singular performing artist and a real sweet guy. And to sort of take it from the very beginning, I first heard Jimi's English album, Jimi Hendrix Experience, between bands at the Fillmore. They used to play music from bands that are upcoming shows. And everyone was going, what is that? I never heard anything like that before. And so of course there's the rumors that, yeah, I hear he's from Seattle. No, he's from New York. No, he's from England, So I was already buying records from a shop in London, and I bought the first Jimi Hendrix album, along with other early English albums. Back then, first of all, the English and American versions were always different songs. And also, you could have an album come out in England 4 or 5 months before it came out in America. So I got that album, and I took it to Johnny Hyde, who on Croy Radio once a week had the Gear Hour with all the hip hop and new music. And I remember that one and the Pink Floyd album, he played them as exclusives in Sacramento, and brand new, something's coming up. And so we did that. And then when I first saw Jimi was his first appearance in America as The Experience. And it was on a bill at the original Fillmore with Jimi Hendrix Experience, Gabor Szabo, who was a Hungarian jazz guitarist, and Jefferson Airplane. And it's my understanding that it was the only time in his career as The Experience that he opened a show. And those were the days when they do 2 sets each. You go in at 8, get out at 2. And it's my understanding that after the first night, the Airplane and Gabor came and said, you can close the shows. That's fine with us. So he did his 2 sets, and then we left because we're high school students. We had to get back to Sacramento. And we came out, and Jimi is sitting on the steps of the Fillmore with Chaz Chandler, the bassist for the Animals, who was his first manager. And I walked up to him. I said, what are you guys doing? He goes, oh, we're waiting for a bus, to take us back to our hotel. And I said, oh man, you guys were great, Jimi. You were really fantastic. And he's very sweet. He says, oh wow, really? Did you like it? I said, did I like it? It was unbelievable. It was amazing. I've never seen anything like it in my life. You guys were fantastic. And so we talked a little bit, and I let him wait for his bus. I'd point out that 2 weeks later is Monterey. After that, Purple Haze came out, and he came back to the Fillmore about 4 months later, approximately, and he pulled up driving a brand new orange Stingray. So things had improved for Jimi. But on February 8, 1968, he played Sacramento State College in the men's gym. The show was put on by some friends of mine. And I was just, you couldn't keep me away from exciting musical stuff in Sacramento. So I went out to the airport with them to pick up Jimi, and 2 cars went out, and we got him and Mitch and Noel in their baggage, and we walked across the front of the airport. And as soon as we hit the street, Jimi says, man, has Jimi got any weed? And I used to carry a pocket full of joints. So I whipped 3 joints on him. Of course, it turned out his weed was much better than mine. But then they took Jimi and they went to the hotel room, and I just went back to where they were setting up the show. I didn't hang out with them that night. It's my understanding they got together that night and they went out clubbing. Bobby Blue Bland was supposed to be playing at a club, so they went there, and then it turned out that he wasn't playing that night for some reason. And so they decided to grab a bite to eat, and they went over to Jim Boy's Tacos on Howe Avenue, or Fulton Avenue, and they were just closing up. So I think it was Rick Schultz, one of the producers of the show, knocked on the door and says, listen, we've got Jimi Hendrix here, man. Can we come in and, can you feed us and lock the doors? And they go, okay, sure. So Jimi walked in and said, give me everything on the menu. So, and there's a bunch of guys. So they bring all the food out, and they're all chowing down. But apparently word got out that Jimi was at the Jim Boys, and maybe the radio station said something. But cars start pulling up, and people would pull up and they'd sit out by their car and watch Jimi eat tacos. And by the time they were done eating, there was like 50 cars in the parking lot watching Jimi. That's how that evening ended. And the next night was a show, and I was there from sound check and set up through after the show. And what I loved about being around music in those days is there was no separation between the performer and the audience, and there was no backstage security. And the backstage refreshments were 2 12-packs, and not even on ice. I mean, just here's 2 12-packs, and so we sat around on those. It was a locker room for the gym. We sat around on those wooden benches and talked to Jimmy a lot, and Noel some. Mitch seemed kind of quiet, but we just talked. And what we talked about in those days was like, are you into Muddy Waters? Oh yeah, I love Muddy Waters. Howlin' Wolf? Yeah, I love Howlin' Wolf. You know, we talk about blues guys and music in general. That's kind of when I met musicians in those days. That's what we talk about, is the roots that they had built their music on. And Jimmy came on stage, and I had a little flash camera. So just before he came up, I got up on the stage, looking down the stairs, and I start flashing cameras, but it's a flash camera. So you can see him in the picture. He's like, oh, he's hiding his eyes. And after 3 shots, his manager said, cut that fucking camera off. So, oh, yeah, I see, I understand. So I got off the stage, and then Jimmy came on and just did a typically incredible set. You know, he ate his guitar, he humped the amplifiers, he did all that stuff. And I took some pictures, which ended up being the only known color photos of that particular show, which I eventually sold to Experience Hendrix, the company that manages Jimmy's estate. It's run by his sister Janie, a fellow named John McDonald. Many years later, what year is it? This book was written about that show. 1998, a young man named Matt Taylor was living in Sacramento and decided to write a book about that one show. And here's the whole book, and it's got interviews with everyone who was involved. I'm one of the chapters in the book. And then it's got local media. He's got a frame shot, a color frame shot of Harry Martin's interview with the Jimi Hendrix Experience, which had been thought lost for decades until Matt tracked it down. And what was funny was that Martin didn't know which one was Jimmy, so he did most of the interview with Noel Redding. But this book is just great, and it's everyone reminiscing, all the producers, Rick Schultz, George Gosling, Barry Thornton, Adrian Woodfork from Channel 3, who covered the show and then went on to become a good friend of Jimmy's, and Jimmy would always hang out with Adrian when he came to town. And others that I'm forgetting. Maybe Gene Phillips, I'm not positive. But then after Matt published this book, I put together a panel discussion at Tower Books on Watt Avenue, where we had all the people, including Matt, and Jim Ford, the artist, was there, and the artist for the poster, and the Experience Hendrix magazine, which was a short-lived magazine. It didn't last more than about a year. It was a monthly put out by the estate. They did a cover story on this show, and in the magazine they used excerpts from Matt's book, and they used my photographs. And so we had all the people there, and we spent an hour and a half, 2 hours, just talking about the event. And we realized early on that the stories don't exactly line up, you know. But our attitude was, well, it's my story and I'm sticking to it. So that's how that went with Jimmy. And Jimmy, you know, was just a sweet, nice, open, loving man. Very accessible, not tripped out in any way. Besides being one of the most incredible musicians who ever lived. And I have some notes, and I just spilled my water on the notes. Let's see. Oh, this is some loose end stuff. The original, we talked about KZAP earlier. The original lineup was Ed Fitzgerald, Paul Merriam, Fred Gaines, Kerry Nosler, and Jeff Hughson. We were on 20 out of 24 hours a day. And I was the first librarian, and Tom Donahue of KZAP Radio helped me set the library up. We had talked, I think we had talked about the band Red Wing, but they had a very interesting history. They started off as a folk trio, Tim, Tom, and Ron. And of course, Tim was Timothy B. Schmidt, later of Poco, and then for the last 20 years, the Eagles. Then they became a surf band, the Contenders, Then they became the New Breed. They had a big hit as kind of like the Bo Bromos. They looked like they were an English band, but they were really from Sacramento. And they had the hit Green Eyed Woman. Then they became the Breed, and then finally they became Red Wing, and they did 5 albums on Fantasy Records. There's another funny story about KZAP. It was communally run, you know, and we had staff meetings once a week, and everyone was invited, whether you were on the air, office staff, everyone could come. And these meetings were interminable. They would be 4, 5, 6 hours because everyone had an equal voice, and we all of us decided everything. And it was a very nice, fun, communal way to run a radio station, but it got a little tedious at times. But one of my favorite memories, because we're building the station, we're starving, we're working for $185 a month, and we had a new salesman, and he came in and he was very excited. He says, "I got Bank of America. They want to buy advertising." And we said, "No friggin' way. We're not going to sell advertising to Bank of America. Are you crazy?" I could see the check just floating away. But we said, no, we're not going to allow Bank of America on the air at KZAP. True. Well, there's an interesting, you know, the Sacramento Memorial Auditorium, and we had some posters here of early shows, so early even I didn't even go to them, although I started going to shows in my early teens, and I went to virtually every show they held. But here's some nice R&B posters from shows from 59, 60, around there. But they had lots of great shows, and I went to most of them. And the Stones played there 3 times, 64, 5, and 6. And the first time they came to Sacramento, they played, it was a Monday night concert, and they played the Ed Sullivan Show on Sunday. And after the set, after the song, Sullivan invited Mick Jagger over to say hello and a little 1 or 2 question interview. And when he was done, Mick looked in the camera and said, "We'll see you tomorrow night in Sacramento." So they come to Sacramento, and Channel 3 sent a crew out to the airport. There was like 400 or 500 teenagers, a lot of girls, just teenagers, and they went nuts. I mean, the Stones got off the plane, and everyone stormed them. They went nuts, and the response was so impressive that the Rolling Stones purchased that footage from Channel 3 and sent it back to England to show how well they were doing in America. So like I said, they played there 3 times. They played there 3 times, and on the 3rd time, something extraordinary happened. They were in the middle of their set, and what we know later happened is that Keith Richards hit his guitar against an ungrounded microphone, and it just sounded like a gunshot, whack! And Richard just kind of fell back unconscious and dropped to the floor, and the Stones all looked, and they just kind of stopped playing. And at that moment, I turned to my best friend Tom Church, and I said, "Somebody just shot Keith Richards, and now no band will ever play Sacramento again." See what my priorities were. Turns out he was electrocuted, he was taken to the hospital, but the truth is the Stones never played Sacramento again until they came to the Arco in '82. But that story exists in a book about the history of the Memorial Auditorium. Well, there's another funny KZAP story about. Should I tell the John Misterly, or is that like too dumb? John Misterly's story about the drunk sheriff.
What do you think? People are go for it.
Well, there's 2 funny stories I remember from the KZAP days. One of them is we were blessed at that time in Sacramento to have a sheriff named John Misterly, who was a very heavy set, loudmouth, redneck kind of sheriff, the kind you expect to meet in Mississippi or something. And he was an alcoholic, and he was notorious because he'd go out to lunch and have God knows how many drinks, and you'd see him in the afternoon swerving on the roads and swerving on the freeway, and he hated KZAP. He would love to have been able to put KZAP off the air. And so one afternoon after lunch, he called us up and he goes, I know you're smoking pot down there. I can hear it on the air. I'm going to get you guys, you know. And we said, well, thank you, John, for calling. Appreciate it. Another one of my favorite KZAP stories is the night Country Joe McDonald from Country Joe and the Fish made an appearance on the air, and he had just come back from, I think Europe, maybe Europe, but I think Europe, from recording songs for the soundtrack to a film based on a book by Henry Miller, you know, Tropical Cancer, called Quiet Days in Clichy, Quiet Nights in Clichy, Quiet Days in Clichy, that's what it is. And so he came to KZAP to do this interview about 8 o'clock in the night, it was midweek, and there was about 8 KZAPers there. David Turner was on the board, and most of the KZAPers had dropped acid, as had Country Joe. I didn't that night myself, but so, you know, we're just ready for a big adventure. And they did some interview and some talk, and they invited him to sing, and they said, you know, you can sing anything you want. And Joe says, anything? And yeah, really, anything you want to. So he sang several songs from the soundtrack to Quiet Days in Clichy. And they were extremely graphic about intimate physical acts between adults. And we were going, oh yeah, this is great, you know. But we received some complaints the next day from concerned parents. And even it was taken to the FCC, complaints were taken to the FCC, and they had to consider it. I don't know if they had a specific hearing or not, but people said, oh, this kind of stuff shouldn't be on the radio at 8 o'clock at night. Ultimately, about 5 months later, first of all, we were notified by the FCC that they were looking into this, but about 5 months later, they said, well, you know, it's not against the law, so don't worry about it. I guess this was before George Carlin did the 7 words you can't say on the air. But that was a true KZAP moment. Well, I forget how much, well, there's the history of the Sound Factory, which I guess I won't go into. It's pretty well known by most people. But in 68, 69, we had a lot of great bands there. You want Sound Factory stories?
Where?
Do you want Sound Factory stories?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, in fact, you might want to get what else is going on or leading up to the Sound Factory as far as it being the biggest one.
I'll do that, and then I'll go to clubs.
Okay.
Okay. So the Sound Factory was Sacramento's psychedelic ballroom, and it ran from 68 to 69. 2 owners. 1968 was one owner, and he had budget, and so we had full-color posters and postcards. Second owner, Whitey Davis from the Family Dog, no budget, so we had flyers, black and white flyers, and I was assistant manager under Whitey Davis. But in 68, they had Pink Floyd, Quicksilver, the Santana Blues Band, before they were just Santana, Electric Flag, Country Joe and the Fish, Lynn County, just a lot of big bands. And then with Whitey, we had some real good shows, and we embarked on a 7-week series of the English Invasion bands. And we got through a couple of them before we went out of business. But we had shows like Jethro Tull, Fleetwood Mac, Kaleidoscope, John Fahey. There's a funny John Fahey story. We did a show on a Sunday afternoon, and John was on the bill. And we did the show, and he never showed up. So, we're closing down the building. There's about 8 or 10 people there. And John pulls in. So, well, what time did I go on? We said, John, you didn't read the contract. I mean, you were supposed to be here 4 hours ago. Oh, I didn't know. So he said, well, I'll play anyway, so that we can get paid. And so he did. About 10 of us sat around in chairs in front of the stage, and he had a little bottle in a plastic brown paper bag, and he sat and did a 1-hour concert just for us. Another one of my favorite stories is when Fleetwood Mac played. They had driven straight from Chicago, where they did their now legendary Chicago sessions with a lot of the great Chicago musicians. And they had the boxes of tapes with them. This U-Haul truck pulls up, and it's the road manager, and then I'm there to help them load in about 3 in the afternoon. And so the road manager and they had these 2 big boxes of tapes. There's this little young blonde kid with him, and he explains that he had just joined the band as a guitarist, but the deal was he has to be a roadie too. And his name was Danny Kerwin, who became an essential part of the band and then had a solo career as well. So we loaded them in, and they did it, and it was still Peter Green and Jeremy Spencer, and they did a great show. And it was just, I think a few weeks after that, they went to Southern California, and Jeremy Spencer ran off with that religious cult, and they were never to be seen again. I don't know why my nose itches so much. There's been a lot of clubs in Sacramento, a lot of music clubs. The earliest memory I have of a club is, I think it was called, I'm almost certain it was called The Eye, and it was on 14th, maybe, no, 14th and K Streets, across from Capital Chevrolet, where my father worked as the used car manager. And it was, I think, the very first hit club in Sacramento. And I remember they brought in Sun Ra and a solar orchestra to play there. I didn't go to that show. I went in there one time in the afternoon, and I longed. I was still like 17 or something. It's hard for me to get out at night, and so I didn't get to see the club in full bloom with live music. But I think that was the first psychedelic club in Sacramento. There was a bar over on L Street and 29th. It's where the hospital is now. And it'd been a long time bar, and I can't remember the name of it. I don't remember the name of it. But that was one of the early gathering places for the 60s hip crowd for a couple of months. And someone finally opened up an exclusive hip bar called the Parapal Palace. I believe that's Randy Perriberry who opened that, and I think a guy named Gary, so correct me if I'm wrong. But it was like the first place for the hippies to go. It was our place, you know. And it was beer and wine license only, and they had live music, and people went there to dance and to drink beer. They spent $800 to open the club, and they got their money back the first weekend, so it was an ideal waiting to happen. But other than that, there were other clubs. Of course, Crabshaw Corner, which later became the Oasis, on 19th and I, was the premier Sacramento club in the early 70s. A lot of big names played there. I mean, Van Morrison, Jerry Garcia, on and on and on. I didn't bring a list, but I mean, many top bands played there. It was open for several years, and it was sort of, I would say, the preeminent rock club to dance, hear music, and to see big name acts in a club setting. Rainbow Dower played their opening out of the Oasis when the ownership changed, and Al Skinner opened the Oasis Ballroom, and I was there, and they waited to bring Maria up until midnight so she could start the show, start her set with Midnight at the Oasis. And she had this 3-guitar lineup that was unbelievable. And so many great shows at the Oasis and the Crabshaw Corner. Also another top club in the 70s into the 80s, I think, was the Shire Road Pub. The first location was in Fair Oaks Village, where they were there for a couple of years. And again, we're bringing big names, you know, blues guys, and the Beau Brummels reformed and played at the Shire Road Pub. The reunion, they recorded live tapes, which were finally released by Dig Music here in Sacramento, and represent the only live recordings of the original Beau Brummels, of any Beau Brummels actually. And you know, Willie Dixon played there. A lot of big names, blues guys and rock acts. Then one night the club burned down under mysterious circumstances. Mick Martin's band lost all of their equipment. It was set up to play. And they moved over to Auburn Boulevard, where they stayed for another several years. It was a dance club with occasional headliners, recording acts. Other clubs that come to mind, there was the Public House on Auburn Boulevard that brought in name acts for a while. They were open probably in the early 70s for 4 or 5 months. I saw Dan Hicks get into a fist fight with one of the guys in the audience one night. But Dan's a cheerful guy. And there was the Peppermint Twist, which I don't think I ever went to. And then you get into the 80s and there's a lot more clubs. And that I didn't go too much. I don't recall. Checking notes. Oh, local bands. Wow. There has been so many great bands in Sacramento. Some went on to fame, to one degree or another. A lot of them didn't. But Sacramento, Sacramento has also been very famous for many years as a place for great audiences. Like I talked about the Stones buying the tapes of their reception at the auditorium. At the airport. But live recordings were done at the Memorial Auditorium with Peter, Paul, and Mary, Alan Sherman, and others. I can't remember who else, but other people have recorded live there. But it's always a reputation for great audiences. But there's also great bands. Like bands like The New Breed, who had a hit, Red Wing. Bourgeois Tag was formed here out of a band called Uncle Rainbow. And they, of course, went on to some level of national success. Bread, Mike Boss, the drummer of Bread, came up in Sacramento. Surf bands like the Marauders, who had a regional success on the West Coast. Used to open a lot for the Beach Boys all up down the West Coast. There were great psychedelic bands. There were bands like Cotton and Mud out of Auburn, and their records nowadays go for $2,000. They put out one single, you can't find them. They were great. Warren Jay's band, Warren Jay's a guitarist, The Walking Flower, tremendous psychedelic band that never had any records out, but there's a compilation called The Sounds of Young Sacramento on Ace Records that collected a bunch of unreleased tapes by many of the 60s psychedelic bands in Sacramento. There are a lot of wonderful bands on that. The Skins. First they were the Four Skins, and then they loved that name so much that when they added a fifth member, they became David and the Four Skins. But ultimately they did become the Skins. And they put out 2 singles, didn't sell very many records, but had a tremendous popular following in Sacramento. They were one of Sacramento's top club bands for many years in the 70s. And so many more bands, I just don't recall the names. Now one of the things that I did that I'm proud of that involved Sacramento bands was in 69 and 70. I produced a 2-year series of free concerts in the park at the Village Green at William Land Park. And I wanted to emulate the free shows of Golden Gate Park. So I went into the Recreation Parks Department, and asked for a permit, and they said, well, we do 90-minute permits. I said, I can't do 3 bands in 90 minutes. I need a 3.5-hour permit. So they gave me the very first 3.5-hour permit. And they were free, and they were, during the spring and summer, they were on Saturdays or Sundays, one of the two. And we'd fill up the park, and everyone had a great time passing around the Juggle Red Mountain. Bands played for free. It was really a tremendous time, a lot of fun, a lot of great music, and a lot of Sacramento bands, trying to think of one band I can't, but there was a lot of bands. Too many to mention. And that went for 2 years until it got so big and popular that there was a ruckus with the police. They came in one show and swept the audience, rather heavy-handed, looking for underage drinkers, and then the people started throwing bottles, and I found myself standing in front of a line of 30 policemen in riot gear with a megaphone, asking people, brothers and sisters, let's just go home and see what we work out. But it wasn't that was the end of it. Okay. Well, gee whiz. I have had some involvement with blues music in Sacramento. I started the Sacramento Blues Society in the early 80s. Me and Mick Martin had the idea to form a society, so we went to the Blues Festival one year and put out a yellow legal pad of names and phone numbers and addresses. And then we held our first, from that we had about 300 names. We contacted people, we held our first meeting. I was elected president, and I served for 1 year, and we did about 50 shows. The second half of that year we would do like 2 shows a week at Tootsie's Lounge in Old Sac, and we did shows at the Holiday Inn in South Sacramento with Johnny Taylor and other acts. The Sacramento Blues Festival, of course, it was a long-time favorite here in Sacramento. It lasted, I would say, between 15 and 20 years before it ran out of gas. And I was the assistant to the producer, Phil Devant, for 6 years. And I left that operation in the mid-'80s. But the Blues Festival would bring together the absolute biggest names in the blues from the previous 30 or 40 years every year. There would be like 30 or 40 acts. There would be the Sacramento regional younger bands, Little Charlie and the Nightcats, and people like that. But from the obscure to the famous, I mean, John Lee Hooker, John Mayall, Muddy Waters, the people like Pee Wee Creighton, Percy Mayfield. We also produced with the Blues Society. And I can go on and on. In fact, here's just one poster. Just 1 year, we're talking Percy Mayfield, Little Milton, Eddie Cleanhead Vinson, Charlie Musselwhite, Jimmy Witherspoon, Jimmy McCracklin, Eddie Taylor, the great Texas blues artist, and then about 15 of the local Sacramento bands, including the legendary Johnny Hartzman, who has a worldwide reputation as one of the great blues guitarists. He's no longer with us, but he lived in Sacramento, recorded a lot in the Bay Area and then in Europe and stuff like that. And a lot of tremendous blues artists came out of played in Sacramento through various entities, festivals, society, and individual promoters and clubs. What else are we going to do? Blues and what else?
Local vinyl stores or record stores?
Oh, record stores. Well, record stores. Say a prayer. We grew up in Sacramento where Tower Records was located, the greatest record store that ever existed. Created by Russ Solomon. Started off as a department in his father's drugstore at 16th and Broadway, Tower Drugs. And it started, this whole thing started with Russ in the early, I think he said the early 40s. I just saw him speak the other night. I thought it was mid-50s. But in 1960, he had one business that was both retail and wholesale. It was a one-stop for other record stores to buy from, called the Tower Record Mart, and that closed up in 1959. In 1960, he started Tower Records. So he's still in the drugstore. I had a little department back there, and they had a philosophy of 7 days a week. They had a philosophy of everything. Any record that was in print, they would have a copy of it. And they just were music lovers. They hired only music lovers. As it grew, they had their second location, the first standalone location on Watt Avenue, Watt and El Camino. Then they came back and they built the standalone location on 16th and Broadway, where Russ Solomon still owns a CD store called R5 Records. Then their third store was in San Francisco, Columbus and Bay, and that was in '68, and that kind of blew the thing wide open. It was the right town. They had the right kind of radio stations. They were playing a lot of roots music that the local bands would draw their material from and be influenced by. So Russ found that he could bring in all this folk and blues and jazz, and it would sell as good as the rock records. and the rock records would fly out the door. They would have stacks in all the stores in Sacramento and San Francisco, stacks of an album 6 feet high. They'd have to replenish it 2 or 3 times a day. Russ priced things low, you know, $1.89 for an album, $2.99, you know, that kind of pricing. And they just flew out the store. You had the variety, the choice. You couldn't have picked a better city to live in Sacramento if you collected records. And then the chain went on to grow to close to 200 stores worldwide. And then, you know, finance got hinky and they got overextended and they had to close. It's a shame. But because Sony records were sold in Sacramento, it spawned later in the 70s, 80s, and 90s a lot of used record stores. And one of the first ones was Recycled Records on Auburn Boulevard. And the owner's name is escaping me right now, but he was married to Art Crumb's sister.
Nick Januszkowski.
Huh?
Nick Januszkowski.
Oh, yeah. The owner of Recycled Records, Nick Januszkowski, I believe. But Nick was married to Art Crumb, the great artist's sister. So Art Crumb did flyers for Nick, you know, pieces of art by Art Crumb. He did a couple of them. And then we had Esoteric Records, which opened on Alhambra Boulevard at some point, you know, 20-something years ago, and now exists on El Camino near Ward Avenue, having gone through a couple of owners and a couple of location changes. Well, of course, records, Ed Hartman's Records shop, which he opened in the 80s, and Ed was the first. He started off in a small little cubby hole on 10th Street between J and K, and I walked in there one day, and I went, I knew it. I knew records would be valuable one day, because everyone else was, you know, probably selling for $1 or $2. He was selling for $20 and $30, and he grew to have an international audience. He grew to have a vast inventory, and he got big money on records. Nowadays, it's commonplace for records to get big money, but Ed was the first in this town, and it was pre-internet, and so there was Ed's shop, Records, which still exists to this day in the old Tower Books location at 16th and Broadway, run by his son. But there were other used record shops. Ed's on 21st Street between L and K, I think, L and K, if not K and J. It's called Ed's Threads now, but that was Ed's record store for many years, and then he started carrying electronic equipment, stereo equipment, and clothes. So now it's called Ed's Threads, but he still has records there. And also because of the Tower, hitting the thrift shops has always been very rewarding in Sacramento. A lot of great thrift shops are used to in the old days anyway. So because of Tower Records, so much flowed in terms of collecting records. This is a great town for record collectors to grow out in. Oh, a lot of cool menus, a lot of cool artwork and stuff. This one I don't know. I don't know that piece.
Yeah, this was Hughes Stadium, and that was.
Oh, that's the alternative poster for the Sacramento International Pop Festival. Oh no, give me that. That's an original piece.
Yeah. Yeah, these are things I've donated to the room to these pieces.
This I had never seen this. I've seen 2 poster variations for that show.
Oh, let's keep it.
This is a booklet, huh?
Go ahead and show that and talk on that a little bit.
Well, Tom Tolley just surprised me with this, which is a promotional booklet, like a little magazine for the first international pop music festival held October 15th, 1967 at Hughes Stadium. I have seen 2 posters for this show. I have never seen this booklet before. It was one of the first big shows of the new music in Sacramento, and it starred Jefferson Airplane, Strawberry Alarm Clock, The Breed, Sacramento's own The Breed, introducing The Spirit from Los Angeles. But one of my favorite bands on this bill was the Hourglass, which was a southern psychedelic blues band that did one album on Imperial And when they couldn't get, bust out, they just changed the name to the Allman Brothers Band. And they did pretty good with that. But we got the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band, Hamilton Streetcar, the Sunshine Company, and it was just great. It was a warm spring, or what was it, October? Well, it was still a warm, sunny afternoon at Hughes Stadium, and the colors were out, and banners, and merchants and craftsmen were selling, and a lot of people showed up, and it was a great band, and there was great music, and it was really one of the first big psychedelic shows to be done in Sacramento. And I don't know why they didn't do any more, unless, like what usually happens, the management of the facility or the police say, I don't know, too many hippies, they're smoking pot, can't let that happen again. So maybe that's what happened, I don't really know. But this is a piece. Here's the back page, advertising for the store, Stone Benson in the town and country village. And let me do this. Oh, look at this. Jefferson Airplane, individual pictures and bios. There were the headliners. Trying to be cool with this. And now the Sunshine Company and the Nitty Dirt Band. Strawberry alarm clock in the double truck, center spread, along with McDonald's advertising. They had the big hit Incense and Peppermint at the time. And I'm curious to see where, well, here's the Breed. Oh, they got 2 pages, that's cool. Sacramento's own, the Breed. And, the Hourglass, they got drawn. See, that's why they changed the name of the Allman Brothers. They were getting no respect as the Hourglass. They had a few buttons, but bottom of the bill. So anyway, that's an exciting piece. I've never seen that before. Thank you to Tom Tully.